56 years ago, a 17-year-old girl vanished without a trace after going to a farm in Burrillville, Rhode Island, to collect her final summer paycheck. Authorities suspected the farm owner, who was also the last person to see her, was involved, but no body was found, there was no evidence, and the investigation quickly stalled. For more than 3 decades, her family clung to the faint hope that one day the truth would be revealed and they could bring their daughter home. Then one day, after a major storm, the forest soil behind the farm collapsed, exposing a detail that everyone had previously overlooked. A detail that would change the entire case. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love cases solved after many years of being forgotten, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. In August 1970, Burrillville, a small agricultural town nestled between hemlock forests and winding dirt roads, still retained the familiar peaceful charm of a New England summer. Scattered farms dotted the area around Situate Reservoir, the space so vast and quiet that the sound of wind moving through the treetops was sometimes the only noise for hours on end. In the final days of summer, while locals were busy with the harvest, 17-year-old Hannah Whitford was also finishing up her seasonal work. Throughout the summer, she had worked part-time at Reeves' farm, a property spanning more than 10 acres, managed by 20-year-old Glenn Reeves. Reeves assigned Hannah simple tasks: sweeping, organizing tools, and checking some items before the season ended. On August 2nd, as previously arranged, Hannah went to the farm to collect her final paycheck and complete the remaining tasks. That afternoon, the weather was mild, with the sun gradually lowering behind the trees, casting long shadows across the farm driveway. Daniel Crow, Hannah's 19-year-old boyfriend, was the one who drove her there. He stopped near the farm gate, waited for her to get out, then started the engine and backed up to avoid blocking Reeves' truck. Hannah walked about a few dozen meters, crossing the dirt yard to the row of sheds and the silver metal container, where Reeves usually stored tools and miscellaneous items. Daniel watched from a distance for a while, but after a few minutes, he moved the car to another spot near the tree line, losing direct line of sight to the container area. Time passed, the light continued to fade, and from his parking position, Daniel did not see Hannah return. At first, he simply thought she was talking longer with Reeves or checking items. But as it began to get completely dark, he drove back into the farmyard to look for her. He found no sign of Hannah at the shed area, none around the yard, and none near the entrance gate. Thinking she might have left the farm by another route or walked home on her own, Daniel drove back to the neighborhood where Hannah lived. When he didn't find her there, he immediately told her family. Hannah's family instantly began searching the usual places: friends' houses, nearby stores, the trail behind the house, and everywhere Hannah typically stopped by in the afternoons. All efforts yielded no results. Calls to acquaintances also brought no information. No one had seen Hannah after the moment she entered Reeves' farm. When hours had passed well beyond expectation, the family concluded that Hannah's failure to return could not be due to personal reasons or ordinary delay. At approximately 10:42 p.m., they called the Burrillville Police Department to report that Hannah Whitford had gone missing after going to Reeves' farm and had not returned as expected. When the missing person report was received, a night patrol unit from the Burrillville Police Department was dispatched to Reeves' farm in under 10 minutes. Daniel Crow was waiting at the entrance and pointed out the last place he had seen Hannah. The patrol car stopped, turning all headlights toward the dirt yard, creating a harsh pool of light in the darkness. After confirming basic information, the time Hannah arrived at the farm, the time Daniel lost visual contact, the time the family realized she hadn't returned, the search team was immediately deployed. The first group of officers moved to the shed area and the silver metal container. They swept flashlights along the walls, ground, dark corners, and around the container door. They carefully observed the exterior, but did not expand the inspection inside, as no criminal element had yet been established. Initial observations showed no clear signs of a struggle, no scattered objects, or any emergency indicators around the last known location of Hannah. Another group, followed the trail leading from the farmyard into the hemlock forest behind it. The path was narrow, the ground uneven, and heavily shaded by dense tree cover, severely limiting visibility in nighttime conditions. They moved slowly, sweeping lights in sections, looking for footprints, drag marks, or unusual disturbances on the ground. What they found were only old livestock tracks and farm vehicle tire marks, nothing matching the time of Hannah's disappearance. Moving several hundred meters deeper, the search team stopped at a natural clearing in the forest to check the smaller branching trails. They swept flashlights through bushes and repeatedly called Hannah's name, but received no response. Everything indicated the forest was completely quiet, offering no leads. Meanwhile, another group of officers returned to the farm's living working area to quickly interview those present that afternoon and evening. Most had left early or hadn't seen Hannah after the end of the workday. No one provided any notable clue about her leaving the farm or encountering a stranger. With the initial search area yielding no results, police expanded the check to the surrounding boundaries of Reeves' farm. They swept the dirt roads leading to the main road, shining lights along the ditches on both sides to look for footprints or discarded items. However, the hard, dry ground and numerous old truck tracks made it nearly impossible to distinguish fresh marks. There were no clear signs indicating which direction Hannah might have left the farm in, or that anyone had seen her after her last sighting. Near 1 a.m., the search teams regrouped at the main yard of Reeves' farm to compile information. Reports from all three directions, the container area, forest trail, and outer dirt roads, showed no significant findings. No physical evidence, no new statements, no tracks to follow. The emergency nighttime search concluded with one sole finding: no trace whatsoever of Hannah in the area surrounding Reeves' farm. The Burrillville Police Department recorded the situation as an undetermined missing person case and planned to continue next steps the following morning. On the morning of August 3, 1970, the Burrillville Police Department began the official missing person file establishment phase for Hannah Whitford, based on all data gathered from the previous night's search. The investigation team's first task was to reconstruct Hannah's entire activities during the final 24 hours to create an accurate timeline and pinpoint the starting point of her disappearance. Through discussions with the family, police noted that on the morning and afternoon of August 2nd, Hannah went about her day completely normally, eating breakfast at home, helping her mother with a few small tasks, then visiting a friend who lived nearby in the neighborhood. Around early afternoon, she returned home, changed into clothes suitable for farm work, and informed her family that she would go to Reeves' farm to finish the remaining tasks and collect her outstanding pay. Records also confirmed that around 4:30 p.m., Hannah left home with Daniel Crow in his car. Daniel was immediately the first to be interviewed, as the last person to have close contact with the victim. In his initial statement, Daniel said they arrived at Reeves' farm around 5:05 p.m. Hannah got out and asked him to wait outside the gate. He described Hannah walking toward the shed row and entering the silver metal container area. Daniel watched for a few minutes, then backed the car up to avoid blocking the way and parked near the tree line at the edge of the farm. He stated that after moving the car, his view was obstructed and he could no longer see the container area. When asked to specify the time, Daniel asserted that approximately 30 minutes passed from when Hannah entered the container area until he first went back to look for her. This statement was recorded and temporarily added to the timeline, though it could not yet be independently verified. Next, police took an initial statement from Glenn Reeves, the farm owner where Hannah worked. Reeves confirmed that he had arranged for Hannah to come that day to finish cleanup work and collect her remaining pay. According to Reeves, he was at the shed when she arrived, but was busy moving some equipment and only briefly saw her as she entered the container area. Reeves claimed she did not stay long, and as he recalled, Hannah left the farm earlier than expected via the main exit road. When asked to specify the exact time he last saw her, Reeves only stated that it was still light out, but could not agree on a precise hour. This was noted because it did not fully match Daniel's statement. Police continued compiling all of Hannah's activities that day, including the time she left home, arrived at the farm, when Daniel lost visual contact, and when the family began searching. After cross-referencing the initial data and comparing the statements of the two people directly involved, the investigation team confirmed that the last place Hannah was certainly seen was the silver metal container area at Reeves' farm. Both witnesses and statements matched on this detail, even though the surrounding time points remained unclear. With the information available, police completed the official missing person file for Hannah Whitford, a 17-year-old female who disappeared sometime from late afternoon to early evening on August 2, 1970, at a specific location within the farm where she worked. Recording the container as the final verified point became the central foundation of the file, marking the first completed step to allow the investigation to proceed in a structured manner based on the established timeline. Immediately after completing the timeline reconstruction and initial statements, the investigation team conducted a crime scene examination at Reeves' farm, following the standard procedures of that era. The first priority was the silver metal container area, the confirmed last location where Hannah Whitford was seen. Due to limited forensic equipment in 1970, the entire inspection was carried out using direct visual observation and manual documentation. Officers used handheld flashlights, measuring tapes and notebooks, without blood detection tools or advanced surface analysis equipment available in later decades. Initially, police examined the exterior of the container, noting areas where the silver paint had peeled and light rust on the lower metal corners near the ground. They closely inspected the container door, hinges, handle and edges, looking for signs of forceful pulling or heavy impact. There were no unusual scratches beyond normal wear from regular farm use. The examination team then swept the ground around the container within a few meters radius, searching for drag marks, slip footprints, or any signs of abnormal movement. However, the dry, dusty ground, frequently disturbed by livestock activity, made it nearly impossible to distinguish new from old marks. Officers noted old shoe prints mixed with small truck tire tracks, frequently entering the shed area, so it was impossible to determine which might relate to the disappearance. Next, police opened the container to inspect the interior. It contained garden tools, wooden boxes, old paint cans, rope, and repair materials. The space was cramped and dimly lit, requiring complete reliance on flashlights. Officers paid attention to areas prone to impact or struggle, such as metal walls, floor, and boxes against the sides. However, they found no signs of a struggle, no clearly displaced items, no unusual dents on metal surfaces, and no visible stains or foreign substances. Quick notes indicated the container showed no clear signs of being used for criminal purposes. On the interior ground, multiple layers of dust lay evenly, showing no signs of sudden disturbance. Some boxes and tools were placed close together in a seemingly long-standing disordered arrangement, with no evidence of recent change. After completing the visual inspection, the investigation team photographed the entire area using analog film cameras, the standard equipment of 1970. They took pictures of the container's front, both sides, door area, interior floor, and corners with notable items. The imaging could not capture fine details due to the limited technology of the time, but it was sufficient for inclusion in the case file as reference material. Next, police checked the adjacent shed area and open ground in front, determining whether any major disturbances might relate to Hannah's disappearance. No items were unusually overturned. Most were agricultural tools placed in their familiar farm arrangement. The team also noted sounds, unusual odors, or anomalies in the area, but detected nothing significant. Workers at the farm on August 2nd were asked about container usage, but none reported any changes to the storage order. The crime scene report was detailed regarding weather, lighting, item arrangement, and container condition. All examination data was recorded in descriptive minutes and photographs, confirming no clear evidence of criminal activity at the last location where Hannah appeared. Due to the lack of visible traces, the investigation team concluded that the scene provided no breakthrough information, but the container remained documented in the file as the central point of the disappearance, requiring continued monitoring. Over the next 10 days, the Burrillville Police Department launched a large-scale search operation to expand the scope beyond Reeves' farm, after the initial scene examination yielded no direct leads. On the first day, the search force focused on the hemlock forest behind the farm, an area with complex terrain featuring many intersecting small trails, dense woods, and hard-to-reach lowlands. The investigation team coordinated with local volunteers, firefighters, and some conservation staff to divide the area into grid sections based on topographic maps, assigning each group to zigzag paths to ensure no ground was missed. In areas with many fallen trees or overly dense canopies, they used stakes to mark regions that could not be safely accessed yet, planning to return with additional equipment. By the third day, the search expanded to the shores of Situate Reservoir, a large lake with many small inlets and mixed sand and rock banks. One team used small boats to travel along the water's edge, looking for clothing or floating items, while shore teams moved slowly along perimeter trails, checking areas with overlapping footprints or disturbed soil. The lake was considered potentially relevant because it lay near a route Hannah might have taken on foot if leaving the farm southeastward. In the following days, the search team swept clearings, abandoned land, and old barns within a few kilometers. Some locations were searched multiple times due to rapidly changing terrain from weather. They collected various scattered objects, such as a light-colored strip of fabric, an old rusty paint can, a piece of metal of unknown origin, and a length of old rope. These items were placed in evidence bags, numbered by discovery order, and sent to temporary storage for later examination, although at the time of collection, it could not be determined whether they related to Hannah or were simply naturally occurring objects in the area. Some low-lying land and small ditches made the search difficult. Whenever rain fell, the soft soil became muddy, covering old footprints and making it hard to distinguish new from old. Continuously changing weather conditions over 2 days during the campaign also forced the search team to adjust plans, withdrawing from some areas due to risks of falling trees or unsafe terrain. Teams were required to log detailed notes on each swept segment and photograph even minor disturbed areas. Some zones were marked red due to fallen trees blocking paths or deep pits, requiring the team to wait for additional equipment or outside support to access later. Throughout the process, no direct indicator emerged regarding Hannah's direction of movement. No clothing, personal items, or jewelry clearly linked to her were found. The collected objects lacked specific identifying value and did not establish any connection to the victim. Nevertheless, the search team continued expanding the sweep to areas more than 2 kilometers from Reeves' farm, including little-used dirt roads, abandoned livestock pens, and the vicinity of several old houses once used by residents as storage. Each day, the search grid map was updated, marking completed and remaining zones. All data was added to the file for later compilation. On the 10th day, the large-scale search operation concluded without producing any trace that could determine Hannah's location or status. The vast terrain, numerous natural obstacles, and unpredictable weather made the entire search process severely limited in effectiveness, forcing police to reconsider other investigative directions when no evidence could be found, indicating the victim had left or remained in the expanded area around Reeves' farm. After a 10-day extensive search campaign yielded no useful traces, the investigative team refocused on analyzing the statements of those directly involved to determine if there were any contradictions or gaps in the initial information that could help redirect the case. The first 2 statements to be cross-checked were those of Daniel Crow and Glenn Reeves, as they were the individuals who had the closest contact with Hannah in the period immediately before her disappearance. In Daniel's statement, Hannah entered the container area around 5:10 p.m. He stated that he only observed her for a few minutes before backing his vehicle to the tree line to avoid blocking the road, and then, in the following 30 minutes, he did not see her return. Meanwhile, Glenn Reeves claimed that he only caught a brief glimpse of Hannah while passing through the container area, and according to his recollection, she left the farm earlier than expected while it was still daylight. The first contradiction emerged when comparing these two timelines. If Daniel remained at the farm until around 5:40 p.m. without seeing Hannah reappear, then Reeves' assertion that she left during that period becomes inconsistent, especially since Reeves could not accurately describe the direction Hannah supposedly went. The second contradiction concerned Reeves' claim that he was moving equipment around the barn and only passed by the container area, while Daniel stated that the area was completely quiet with no one coming or going in the minutes immediately after Hannah entered. The investigative team noted that both statements could not be simultaneously true if Daniel and Reeves were both present in the vicinity during the same time frame, yet did not observe each other. To add another perspective, police approached an intermediary witness, a woman living near the farm, who said she drove along the dirt road beside Reeves' farm between approximately 5:15 and 5:20 p.m. She reported seeing a brown-haired girl enter the barn area and did not see her come out while I was still there. This witness could not confirm the face but described clothing and build that matched Hannah's identification. When cross-referencing this statement with Daniel's, the team identified a common point. Hannah was seen entering the container area, but there was no independent evidence confirming that she ever left it. In contrast, Reeves' statement was not corroborated by any other person. To organize the collected information, the investigative team created a detailed timeline chart marking times, individual statements, and their degree of consistency with factual data. This chart clearly highlighted two incompatible time periods, 5:10 p.m. to 5:20 p.m. and 5:20 p.m. to 5:45 p.m. Both periods conflicted with Reeves' claim that Hannah left the farm early and quickly. Additionally, Reeves' inability to provide a specific direction of travel, while Daniel insisted he saw no one pass through the main gate, highlighted a significant gap in his description. In summary, the investigative team observed that objective facts such as sunset time, the presence of the intermediary witness, and the consistency in Daniel's statement all supported the assumption that Hannah remained in the container area for longer than Reeves described. However, because no physical evidence proved her presence after that point, this contradiction chart was retained in the file as data requiring continued monitoring. The conclusion of this analysis was Daniel's statement and the intermediary witness created a relatively coherent sequence of events, while Reeves' statement contained many unverifiable details and was inconsistent with the established timeline. After the contradiction timeline was completed, rather than continuing to scrutinize Reeves as a subject requiring further verification, the police investigation shifted almost entirely to focus on Daniel Crowe, based on the hypothesis of a personal conflict between the two young people who had a romantic relationship. Some officers believed Daniel may have argued with Hannah before she entered the container area, even though no direct evidence supported this. This assessment was largely based on common patterns in missing persons cases involving acquaintances rather than on specific data collected. This quickly placed Daniel in the position of primary suspect, requiring him to repeat his statement multiple times to search for inconsistencies, while also expanding checks into his background, daily habits, and relationships. Despite the initial record suggesting no dangerous or unstable behavior whatsoever. Meanwhile, Reeves, who was present at the victim's last known location and owned the property where Hannah was last seen, was evaluated as a cooperative witness. Merely because he remained calm, provided clear answers, and showed no visible tension during interviews, Reeves was prematurely eliminated from suspicion. No independent measures were taken at that time to verify his statement, nor was any effort made to accurately reconstruct his movements around the time Hannah disappeared. His claim that Hannah left the farm early was recorded without cross-checking against real-world data, such as daylight conditions at the time, Daniel's presence at the gate, or the intermediary witness who saw Hannah enter but not exit. This created a serious investigative gap and led to an early misdirection of the case. At the same time, the investigation was influenced by emotional factors, as some officers directly handling the case believed that the disappearance of a teenage girl, was most likely related to a romantic issue. These evidence-free assumptions gradually shaped the approach to the case, putting Daniel on the defensive, while Reeves was virtually no longer followed up on. Internal notes from the investigative force at the time show excessive confidence in the subjective judgment that Reeves was someone with no reason to cause harm because he had employed Hannah for the entire summer and had no prior negative record in the community. However, these arguments were entirely unsupported by objective risk analysis and merely reflected superficial character assessments, a factor that frequently causes bias in missing persons cases from the era before detailed behavioral evaluation standards existed. The lack of physical verification at the container directly contributed to this misdirection. Due to the technological limitations of the 1970s, the team only visually inspected the metal surfaces and surrounding area without using any trace detection equipment. This caused potentially critical details inside the container, such as microfibers, impact marks, or drag marks, to be completely overlooked. Recording the container as Hannah's last seen location was not followed by any expanded steps to determine whether there had been changes in the internal environment or displacement of objects that might have investigative significance. Instead, all attention was directed toward examining Daniel's schedule and repeatedly questioning him in search of minor variations in his statement that could be interpreted as suspicious points. The nature of this approach shifted the investigation from evidence-based analysis to the pursuit of psychological hypotheses, an entirely unsupported direction given the available factual data. During this process, potential leads related to Reeves were set aside. His statement was not thoroughly cross-checked against the timeline. No independent verification of his location during the critical 5:06 p.m. window was conducted, and no behavioral assessment was performed to determine the reliability of his description. This resulted in a biased suspect profile in which Daniel was rated high risk solely based on his proximity to the victim, while Reeves, the person who controlled the space where the victim disappeared, was not adequately examined. In summary, the investigative team recorded that the misplacement of focus and the premature elimination of Reeves from suspicion caused the case to reach a complete impasse. An emotion-driven investigative direction that relied heavily on assumptions rather than evidence, combined with the failure to thoroughly exploit the physical crime scene at the container, created a major gap that prevented progress in clarifying Hannah's disappearance during the crucial days following the event. By the end of 1971, after nearly 18 months without any significant progress, the Burrillville Police Department was forced to reassess the entire status of the Hannah Whitford missing persons case and consider closing the file due to lack of basis for further investigation. All existing data indicated that the investigation had reached a complete deadlock. The victim's location could not be determined. There were no signs that Hannah had left the Reeves farm area in any specific direction, and repeated expanded searches yielded no results. With no body, no weapon, and no clear evidence of a crime, the case could not be reclassified as a criminal investigation and remained in the unresolved missing persons category. Evidence items collected during the large-scale search campaign, including strips of fabric, metal fragments, and other small objects, could not be subjected to in-depth forensic analysis with the technology available in the early 1970s. These items lacked obvious identifying characteristics, showed no direct connection to the victim, and no biological information could be extracted under the technical conditions of the time. As a result, they were classified as of undetermined value and merely stored for potential future comparison should new data emerge. The container, the last place Hannah was seen, provided no additional information. The absence of specialized equipment for micro-trace analysis eliminated the possibility of deeper examination. From the professional perspective of 1972, the scene contained no elements that would allow for a clear continuation of the investigation. Additionally, witnesses interviewed multiple times over 2 years provided no new facts beyond what had been recorded in the earliest phase. No supplementary statements established Hannah's existence after her last sighting, and no one reported any suspicious behavior in the area during that time. The complete absence of new leads made it impossible to continue active investigation procedures. With all of the above factors, in early 1972, the Burrillville Police Department officially classified the case as missing no leads and transferred it to the state's cold case category, according to the procedures in place at the time. The file was sealed and sent to the state archives in Providence, where long-term storage of unresolved missing persons cases was maintained. Unidentified evidence was packaged with the file, assigned batch numbers, and placed in a dedicated storage facility awaiting future forensic technological advances that at the time, no one could predict would be capable of clarifying anything. The closure of the case reflected the technological, resource, and methodological limitations of that period, officially marking the transition of the Hannah Whitford case from an urgent search to a long-term directionless missing persons file. Over the 3 decades following the transfer of the Hannah Whitford file to cold case status in 1972, the case saw virtually no significant developments, except for 2 formal reviews in 1983 and 1991 under the state's periodic review process. In 1983, when a new investigative team was assigned to review long-standing missing persons files, Hannah's case was pulled for examination to determine whether any prior data had been overlooked or if new technology could be applied. However, the review quickly concluded that there was no basis for expansion, no body, no evidence of forensic value by the standards of the time, and no additional witnesses who could clarify the gaps in the 1970 timeline. As a result, the file was returned to storage with the status unchanged. By 1991, when Rhode Island conducted a larger review aimed at partially digitizing old data, Hannah's file was again retrieved. This time, the evidence collected between 1970 and 1971 was re-examined for physical condition, but most of it had deteriorated. Fabric strips were partially rotted, metal fragments were heavily oxidized, and other small objects had lost their original properties. No technology available in the 1990s could extract DNA from such severely damaged material, rendering analysis pointless. The review's record concluded that the evidence risked complete loss of value if degradation continued, yet it also failed to meet the threshold for generating any new leads. Throughout the period from 1972 to 2004, Glenn Reeves, the individual initially regarded as a cooperative witness, continued to live and work in Burrillville. Because he was not retained as a person of interest after the initial investigation, no follow-up monitoring or behavioral reassessment was ever conducted on him. Reeves expanded his farm operations, participated in some community work, and had no incidents that prompted police to re-examine his connection to the disappearance. His ability to maintain a normal life and avoid attention in the community further contributed to Hannah's file sinking deeper into obscurity. Meanwhile, the metal container, the final place Hannah was seen, was not subjected to any further inspection for more than 30 years. Over time, the container was reused for various purposes on the farm, erasing or completely altering any original traces that might have existed. No crime scene preservation procedures were applied in the 1970s, resulting in the container losing all investigative value long before modern forensic technology could be deployed. All of these factors kept the Hannah Whitford file in a state of absolute freeze, no new data, no additional investigative directions, and no indication that the case could ever be resolved. Entering the early 2000s, the file remained in the Providence archives, filed among hundreds of other state missing persons cases, lying dormant and almost never mentioned in annual reviews. In early March 2004, a powerful storm swept through northern Rhode Island, bringing heavy rainfall and sustained high winds for many hours, causing severe erosion in many forested areas of Burrillville. The area behind Reeves' farm, where the terrain consisted largely of soft sloping soil mixed with loose rock, was directly affected when a section of hillside tens of meters long slid down to a lower slope. After the storm cleared, residents near the farm reported many fallen trees and deep soil slides, creating a long gully running along the edge of hemlock forest. About 3 days after the storm, a local man hunting deer in the morning noticed the area had changed dramatically and followed the landslide gully to check whether any new paths had formed, or if animal tracks had been affected by the terrain shift. As he approached a section where the surface soil had been stripped away, he noticed something different from the surrounding earth. A smooth, pale ivory-colored curved fragment, partially exposed above the ground. At first he thought it was animal bone, but upon closer inspection, its shape and curvature made him suspect it was not from an animal. Continuing to examine nearby eroded areas, he noticed additional small bone fragments scattered along the slide path. Suspecting these might be human remains, he immediately left the woods and used the nearest payphone to call the police. Approximately 40 minutes later, a Burrillville police patrol team arrived, cordoned off the area with yellow tape, and instructed residents to stay back while awaiting the state forensic team to take over the scene. When the forensic team and investigators arrived, they conducted a preliminary survey and quickly confirmed that what had emerged from the slid soil was indeed human bone. The discovery of human remains in this location immediately created a situation requiring careful handling, as the site was not far from Reeves' farm, a location previously connected to an unresolved missing persons case for over 30 years. In the initial establishment of the new scene, investigators cordoned off a landslide gully more than 20 meters wide, marking every position likely to contain bone or related objects. Because the soil had slid downward, bone fragments may have been displaced from their original position, forcing the forensic team to expand the search area to include both the upper section, where the soil had collapsed, and the lower slope where soil had accumulated in small patches. They used probing rods and marker stakes to detect hard objects hidden beneath the post-storm mud layer. During collection, the forensic team found numerous bone fragments of varying sizes, including a portion of long bone, several small limb bones, and shattered bone pieces caused by impact during the landslide. In addition, they discovered a patch of rotted fabric caught between two soil clumps covered in mud and tree roots. Although the fabric was too damaged to immediately determine color or pattern, it was collected according to human bone evidence protocols to avoid loss of sample. Each bone fragment was placed in a specialized evidence bag, numbered according to order of discovery, and noted with its relative position on the scene map. Investigators recorded the depth of exposed soil layers, degree of erosion, and direction of the slide to predict the spread range of bone fragments from the original burial site. This was intended to assist in reconstructing the initial position of the body. While bone collection proceeded, the forensic team also assessed the overall terrain. The slid soil layer showed evidence of an area that had been dug or disturbed many years earlier, clearly different from the surrounding undisturbed soil. This observation was included in the scene report, although it could not yet be determined whether it resulted from natural activity or human intervention. After many continuous hours of work on the first day, the forensic team collected nearly 20 bone fragments that appeared to belong to the same individual. As evening fell, the search was temporarily halted, but the area remained under strict cordon overnight to ensure no unauthorized access or further disturbance. The following day, collection continued with light raking of remaining soil on the slope to search for additional bone or related items. Several more fabric fragments along with soil samples taken at 3 different depths were collected for later analysis. At the conclusion of the initial 2-day scene processing, all recovered remains and evidence were transported to the State Forensic Laboratory for identification of the deceased and determination of time of death. The discovery of human remains in the area behind Reeves' farm, more than 3 decades after the Hannah Whitford case was classified as missing, immediately became a major development, forcing police to consider the possibility that this could be a critical piece related to one of Burrillville's longest-standing unsolved disappearances. At the Rhode Island State Medical Examiner's Office, the entire collection of bones recovered from the landslide area behind Reeves' farm was transferred in properly sealed condition, distinctly labeled according to each discovery location. Upon receipt, the forensic team immediately began preliminary sorting to determine whether the bone fragments belonged to one or multiple individuals. Initial morphological examination showed that the majority of the bones were of a size and proportion consistent with a young adult or late adolescent, with mineralization levels and bone tissue structure unlike those of child bones. A team of forensic anthropologists reviewed each fragment, placing them on the analysis table to observe structural features, fracture patterns, curvature, and degree of wear, thereby making a preliminary determination that the skeleton most likely belonged to a female between the ages of 15 and 20 at the time of death. This assessment was based on the length of long bones, the shape of the pelvis, and the development of epiphyseal fusion points, factors routinely used in forensic anthropology to determine sex and age. Additionally, the analysis revealed that the bones had been exposed to natural environmental conditions for several decades, as evidenced by pitting, erosion, and color changes caused by soil, water, and microorganisms. These parameters allowed the team to estimate the time of death as sometime in the early 1970s, coinciding with the period when Hannah Whitford disappeared. While reassembling portions of the skeleton, the forensic team paid particular attention to a clearly cracked piece of skull. The fracture line ran diagonally from the frontal region to the temporal area, exhibiting the characteristic concentrated cracking pattern of blunt force trauma. The fracture surface showed signs of injury occurring before the body decomposed, indicating the trauma happened while the victim was alive or at the moment of death. The fracture pattern did not match natural post-mortem compression, such as from soil pressure or rock impact after burial, making it highly likely to be the result of a forceful impact against a hard surface. This finding was carefully documented due to its critical significance in determining the cause of death. After examining external indicators, the forensic team proceeded to the most crucial step, extracting DNA from bone marrow. Given the more than 30 years of decomposition, the DNA in the bones was likely highly fragmented, making extraction challenging. However, by 2004, PCR techniques had advanced sufficiently to handle severely degraded samples. Technicians took samples from well-preserved long bones, drilling into the remaining marrow cavity to obtain DNA material. The samples underwent multiple stages of extraction, amplification, and purification before being processed through the genetic analysis system to produce a complete or near-complete DNA profile. In parallel, the investigative team retrieved archived evidence files from 1970 to determine whether any biological samples of Hannah Whitford had been preserved. From the Providence storage facility, they recovered an evidence envelope still bearing the case number from the year of the disappearance, containing several hairs collected from Hannah's personal hairbrush shortly after she went missing. Although the hairs lacked roots, making nuclear DNA extraction difficult, the forensic team was able to obtain mitochondrial DNA, a type inherited maternally and useful for identification when no direct reference sample is available. Once analysis was complete, experts compared the two mitochondrial DNA samples, one from the bone marrow and one from the hair. The results matched perfectly across all tested loci, confirming that the skeleton found at the 2004 landslide site belonged to the same individual as the hair sample from Hannah Whitford, who disappeared in 1970. To further strengthen the conclusion, the forensic team compared anthropological characteristics, estimated femur and tibia lengths, along with skeletal development markers consistent with the height, sex, and age reported by Hannah's family. All data aligned, eliminating the possibility of misidentification. The medical examiner's office subsequently issued a detailed report confirming that the remains found in the landslide area belonged to a female approximately 17 years old at the time of death, with an estimated date of death in early August 1970, and positively identifying the victim as Hannah Whitford. This conclusion ended 34 years of anonymity for the remains and established a direct link between the 2004 discovery site and the unsolved disappearance from August 1970, laying a solid forensic foundation for a renewed investigation. After the remains were positively identified as Hannah Whitford, the Rhode Island cold case team immediately began reanalyzing the entire 1970 case file according to 2004 investigative standards, aiming to identify the gaps and errors that had led to the case being closed without determining the true cause of death. The first task was to re-examine the original timeline established in the days immediately following Hannah's disappearance. The 1970 records documented the basic timeline, Hannah left home around 4:30 p.m. on August 2nd. She arrived at Reeves' farm at 5:05 p.m. Dropped off by Daniel at 5:10 p.m. Hannah was seen entering the metal container area between 5:15 and 5:20 p.m. A witness living near the farm saw a brown-haired teenage girl enter the barn area and did not see her leave from 5:20 to 5:40 p.m. Daniel waited but did not see Hannah return around 6 p.m. Daniel left the farm to check at Hannah's house at 10:42 p.m. The family reported her missing to police. These timestamps were recorded piecemeal across various notes, but when the 2004 team reconstructed them into a unified timeline, they realized that while the surface timeline appeared seamless, there were actually several critical gaps that had not been properly addressed in the initial phase. Particularly, the key window from 5:10 p.m. to 5:45 p.m., when Hannah was last seen, lacked any independent verification beyond the statements of Daniel and an intermediary witness. Glenn Reeves' statement, despite directly relating to the final location where the victim was seen, had not been rigorously cross-checked at the time. During the reanalysis, the cold case team focused on evaluating the credibility of Reeves and Daniel's statements using modern reliability assessment methods, while also reconstructing movement paths using motion analysis software. When both statements were input into the system, the model showed that if Reeves had actually seen Hannah leave the farm as early as he claimed, he would have needed a much wider field of view than was realistically possible from the barn area, which was heavily obstructed by large equipment and surrounding trees. This obstruction made it impossible for the vantage point Reeves described to cover the only exit Hannah could have used. This raised the possibility that Reeves was not standing where he claimed, or did not observe at the time he described. In contrast, Daniel's statement, although thoroughly scrutinized at the time, aligned with environmental data, including the gradual fading of daylight in early August afternoons, as well as his parking position, which would have prevented him from seeing the entire container area, but still allowed visibility of the farm gate. The cold case team also discovered that the 1970 files contained no documentation of any attempt to verify Reeves' credibility through position and line-of-sight checks. The 2004 investigation concluded that Reeves' statement had been accepted far too readily without any independent validation steps. Upon closer examination of the old files, investigators identified 4 major procedural failures in the original investigation. 1. Reeves was eliminated as a suspect far too early based on subjective impressions of his cooperative demeanor rather than on behavioral analysis or statement consistency. 2. The metal container, the confirmed last location where the victim was seen, was not thoroughly examined, allowing many potential traces to go undetected. 3. The investigation was unduly biased toward Daniel, despite the absence of objective evidence to support suspicion against him. 4. No motion modeling or scene reconstruction was attempted, even though such methods were feasible with the technology available at the time. To supplement the analysis, the cold case team used 3-dimensional human motion simulation software, placing simulated positions of Hannah, Reeves, and Daniel based on the 1970 terrain descriptions. The simulation demonstrated that the likelihood of Hannah exiting the container through the main door without being seen was extremely low, especially since Daniel insisted he saw no one leave the farm through the only gate while he waited in his vehicle. Furthermore, the model showed that Reeves was the only person with both the position and reason to be in the container area during the critical time window. As a result, the investigation identified Reeves as a subject who had not been adequately investigated, in stark contrast to the 1970 assessment. Designating Reeves as the central unresolved element of the reanalysis was entered into the 2004 cold case file as the most significant conclusion, providing the basis to re-examine the entire sequence of events using new evidence, while also demonstrating that the original gaps and errors in crime scene processing and witness interviewing were the direct cause of the case, remaining stalled for over 30 years. Immediately after the reanalysis of the 1970 file highlighted the metal container at Reeves Farm as both the last confirmed location where Hannah Whitford was seen and an area containing multiple anomalies that had never been properly examined. The 2004 cold case team decided to conduct a full modern forensic re-examination of the container using techniques unavailable in 1970. After more than 30 years, the container remained in its original location behind the barn, though it had been repurposed for various farm uses over time. Before beginning the examination, the area was completely secured, and all items inside the container were sealed and numbered to ensure no potential evidence was disturbed. The first step was to scan the entire interior and exterior surfaces of the container using visible light combined with high-resolution cameras to document the current condition of the metal surfaces. Although this was only the preliminary step, the examination team observed several areas on the container walls with asymmetrical wear patterns and a few subtle indentations that would have been extremely difficult to detect with the naked eye in 1970. After full photographic documentation, the forensic team employed alternative light sources, including ultraviolet, blue, and infrared light, to search for residual organic and inorganic traces that might have survived decades of exposure. When UV light was directed at the left interior wall, they detected several faint but stable fluorescent points, indicating the presence of microfibers embedded deep in the metal crevices. This area was immediately marked and sampled using specialized adhesive tape for microtrace collection. Under blue ALS light, the forensic team observed small, granular reflective streaks along the lower portion of the container wall, corresponding to the location where Hannah's skull could have struck if she had fallen or been forcefully pushed. These particles were very small, silver in color, and after analysis, the laboratory confirmed they were paint flakes, matching the original metallic paint composition used on the container in the 1960s, meaning they were not from later uses of the container, but rather paint chips, dislodged during the period of Hannah's disappearance. This discovery became one of the first physical traces, proving that a significant impact event had occurred inside the container at the time Hannah was last seen. The next step involved using forensic laser scanning to detect metal deformations that ordinary or UV light could not reveal. The laser, operating at a narrow wavelength, clearly highlighted the depth and spread of indentations. On the left metal panel, near the location of the microfibers, the laser revealed an indentation approximately 10-12 centimeters in diameter, with the center depressed 2-3 mm deeper than the edges. Based on the characteristics of this type of container, the forensic team determined this was an impact mark from direct perpendicular force, not wear from rubbing objects or normal use. Moreover, the indentation pattern was consistent with a soft, massive object striking the surface, perfectly matching the blunt force injury pattern previously identified on Hannah's skull. To further establish the connection between the container and the remains, the forensic team matched the angle and height of the indentation. Measuring from the container floor to the indentation placed it between 142 centimeters and 146 cm, corresponding to the height of Hannah's head if she had been standing or pushed into the wall at a slightly lower position than her average height. This further reinforced the direct link between the skull injury and the container wall. Continuing the ALS scan, the team found additional tiny microfibers lodged in metal crevices near the container door. Electron microscopy analysis identified these as a polyester cotton blend, common in women's clothing in the late 1960s, and crucially, the fiber color matched descriptions of the shirt Hannah was wearing on the day she disappeared, according to family statements and old photographs. Comparison with degraded fabric fragments recovered from the landslide site confirmed matching weave structure and aging characteristics, supporting the hypothesis that Hannah's clothing had direct contact with the container's interior wall during the event that caused her injury. Additionally, the laser detected small sliding marks on the metal surface, located several dozen centimeters from the main indentation, running straight downward toward the floor. While the exact cause of these slide marks could not be definitively determined, They were consistent with the body sliding down due to momentum after a heavy impact. All deformed metal surfaces and paint flakes, originating from the container's original condition prior to modifications, reeves made in the 1980s, were matched and confirmed to exhibit long-term aging characteristics, ruling out later introduction during subsequent uses. The discovery of clothing microfibers, original paint flakes, and an impact mark consistent with the victim's injury allowed the cold case team to reach the most critical conclusion of the container examination. This was the location where Hannah Whitford sustained the blunt force trauma that led to her death. The accumulated evidence not only established the container as the central crime scene, but also shattered the decades-long assumption that it contained no significant clues, while proving that the key traces had been overlooked in the 1970 investigation due to technological limitations and flawed methodology. After the container examination results indicated the presence of a metal dent corresponding to a heavy impact, the state forensic team proceeded with a critical analysis step to determine the precise mechanism of Hannah Whitford's death by comparing the injury on the skull bone with the deformation characteristics of the container. The work began with a detailed examination of the crack pattern on the skull fragment recovered from the landslide scene. Under forensic microscopy and 3D surface scanning systems, the crack exhibited a stellate or star-shaped radiation pattern, a characteristic injury type resulting from blunt force trauma impacting a small surface area with great force, causing energy to radiate outward and create multiple secondary fracture branches. The cracks radiated in a radial pattern from the central impact point, where the core featured a small depression consistent with trauma caused by a hard, non-sharp-edged object. Additionally, the bone surface at the fracture site showed signs of antemortem injury, meaning the break did not occur post-mortem during decomposition in the soil environment. These features were fully documented due to their significant value in determining the cause of death. Next, the forensic team conducted impact force reconstruction using collision simulation models based on 2004 standards. Based on bone density, skull thickness at the injury site, and the crack propagation pattern, the experts determined that the impact force had to equate to a heavy blow from the front or from above, with a force magnitude exceeding the natural tolerance of human bone at age 17. Simulations showed that a perpendicular or near-perpendicular impact force against the bone surface would produce the observed radiating fracture pattern. These parameters were then input into collision simulation software, with the human head model configured to match Hannah's statistically representative size and height. The simulation test demonstrated that the force level producing the matching fracture pattern most closely corresponded to a situation in which the victim's head struck a broad, flat, non-edged metal surface, such as the interior wall of the container. To reinforce the analysis, the forensic team directly compared the location, depth, and shape of the dent on the container with the simulated skull fracture. The container dent featured a central depression with a depth of 2-3 mm, spreading to a diameter of approximately 10-12 centimeters, consistent with the contact area of the skull upon impact with the metal surface. The deformation characteristics of the metal plate, particularly the slight radial flaring around the central dent, indicated that the impacting object possessed natural elasticity and non-uniformity, matching the soft tissue structure surrounding the human skull. The experts assessed that this was not a dent caused by heavy farm equipment, as impacts from sharp or hard-edged objects typically leave tearing, angular marks, or more pronounced distortion. This match allowed the elimination of the possibility that the metal plate was deformed due to routine work activities or mechanical impact from engines or machinery. Continuing the impact mechanism reconstruction, the forensic team placed a human body model into a 3D simulation environment of the container, with dimensions and object positions recreated as closely as possible to the conditions in the 1970 period. Based on old photographs and descriptions from individuals who worked at the farm at that time, the model showed that if Hannah stood 10 to 40 centimeters away from the container wall, a strong push or forward fall could result in her head striking directly at the location matching the dent discovered in 2004. The height of the dent, approximately 142 to 146 centimeters from the floor, also perfectly corresponded to the head region of Hannah if she was in a standing position or being shoved while slightly bent or off balance. When comparing parameters between the skull fracture and the metal deformation, the experts noted similarities in the direction of force application, contact location, and crack propagation. Specifically, the bone fracture radiated horizontally and diagonally, consistent with a lateral impact from the left side or left front of the victim's head, aligning with the position of the dent in the container. To further clarify the severity of the impact, the forensic team analyzed the load-bearing model of an adolescent human skull. Hannah's bone, per the sample analysis, exhibited density and mineralization consistent with a 17-year-old, therefore having lower impact resistance than that of an older adult. Simulation tests indicated that the force applied to her head had to be equivalent to a heavy impact exceeding 1,000 newtons to produce the observed fracture pattern. This is a level of force highly unlikely to result from a simple self-trip or minor loss of balance collision. It is more consistent with a strong push causing direct head impact against a flat metal surface. Additionally, the forensic team found no evidence of multiple impact points on the skull or injuries from different force sources, indicating that the fatal trauma resulted from a single heavy impact. This eliminated hypotheses involving complex accidents such as multiple falls, heavy objects falling onto her, or dragging causing repeated collisions. All analyses converged on a clear mechanism of death, a powerful force applied directly to the head region, causing skull fracture and rapid death. Combining all data from fracture shape, bone mineralization level, impact simulations, container deformation, and dent location, the forensic experts concluded that Hannah Whitford's cause of death was severe blunt force head trauma occurring when her skull struck directly against the interior metal wall of the container. This conclusion was explicitly recorded in the forensic report and played a pivotal role in redefining the nature of the events at Reeves Farm on the afternoon of August 2, 1970. Immediately after the forensic conclusion identified the container as the location where Hannah Whitford sustained the fatal injury, the cold case investigation team recognized the need to fill in the remaining gaps in the event timeline, particularly the critical period from 5:10 p.m. to 5:40 p.m. on August 2, 1970, during which only Daniel Crow and Glenn Reeves were present at Reeves Farm. Daniel, now in his mid-50s, was invited to provide supplemental testimony. After being informed that the new forensic findings could resolve misunderstandings persisting for decades, Daniel agreed to full cooperation and disclosed details he had lacked the courage to reveal in 1970. In his 2004 statement, Daniel admitted that immediately before Hannah entered the container area, there had been a tense exchange between him and Reeves. According to Daniel, when the vehicle stopped at the farm gate, Reeves approached the yard area as if waiting for Hannah. Daniel had felt that Reeves displayed a possessive attitude toward Hannah throughout the summer she worked at the farm, and underlying tension between the two had existed previously. Daniel stated that as Hannah walked into the storage building area, Reeves turned to him and made a provocative remark. The two exchanged words, with voices growing louder. But Daniel insisted Hannah could not hear because she had already moved more than 10 meters into the container area. According to his account, Reeves suddenly stepped close to Daniel, pushed him back toward the vehicle, and warned him that Daniel did not need to interfere in the farm's work. Daniel said he lost his composure, but not wanting to cause trouble for Hannah while she was collecting her pay, chose to leave the initial parking spot and drive to the tree line area, as he had originally stated in 1970. However, in the new statement, Daniel added that while moving the vehicle to the tree line, he continued to watch the storage building and in a few brief moments saw Hannah's figure standing near the container door and Reeves entering that area. Daniel reported that from his position, he saw Reeves reach out as if pulling or holding Hannah back, and just seconds later, he saw Hannah's figure lose balance and fall heavily into the container. He did not see the exact point of impact, but according to his description, Hannah jerked, then fell sideways as if pushed or pulled off balance. Daniel said that at the time, he was confused and believed it was only a minor accident or slip because the container contained many objects. He admitted he did not immediately run to help because he was still afraid of Reeves after their recent argument. When asked why these details were absent from his 1970 statement, Daniel said he feared being considered the cause of the accident or being held responsible for witnessing it without immediately reporting to police. At the same time, Daniel believed a statement against Reeves would not be believed due to the pre-existing personal conflict between them. Daniel also added that after seeing the fall, he waited a few minutes to see if Hannah would come out. When there was no movement, he left the vehicle and headed toward the container. However, Reeves suddenly appeared from the storage building side, standing between him and the path to the container. Reeves said Hannah was getting items and would be right back, and demanded that Daniel not enter the equipment storage area. Daniel described Reeves as having an unusual demeanor at that moment, voice low but tense. After about a minute of verbal standoff, Daniel left the farm in a state of confusion and worry. In his original 1970 statement, he had only said he did not see Hannah so returned to her home, but now Daniel admitted that his departure was due to feeling Reeves deliberately blocked him from approaching the container area and that he had been too frightened to remain. This supplemental statement was incorporated into the new timeline by the investigation team. The details Daniel provided aligned with the forensic conclusions. The impact dent inside the container was consistent with a heavy fall caused by external force. Reeves' presence in the container fitted Kane. The stad what the tenetainteen. Pors heavyed fitted menendet tad permanendet tenetainteen. The Macon Pearson spouted of the abysm section the ferning 10. For few thoughts in the fitting prations area at the exact moment of injury was logical, and Hannah's failure to emerge after the fall matched evidence that she lost consciousness immediately. Additionally, Daniel's new statement filled the previously empty time gap in the 1970 records from approximately 5:15 to 5:25, which was the only period during which the fatal impact could have occurred. Daniel's admission that he left the scene out of fear, rather than solely out of concern for Hannah as originally claimed, helped investigators explain why no one raised the alarm during that crucial period. When cross-referenced with all forensic evidence, the cold case team concluded that Daniel had supplied the missing pieces of the timeline, and his statement, though given more than 30 years later, allowed a more accurate reconstruction of what occurred inside the container on the afternoon Hannah disappeared. With Daniel Crow's supplemental testimony, the forensic conclusion regarding the mechanism of death, and the physical traces in the container, the cold case investigation team proceeded to assemble all evidence into a complete sequence of events and determine Glenn Reeves' criminal responsibility. They began by organizing all 2004 forensic findings. The metal dent on the container wall matched the direction, location, and force of the impact that produced Hannah's skull fracture. Clothing microfibers found in the metal seam matched the material Hannah was wearing on the day she disappeared. Paint particles originating from the container adhered to the clothing microfibers, indicated the victim's body struck the container wall surface while it still bore its original metal paint coating. Motion simulation models confirmed that the location and height of the dent fully corresponded to Hannah's head height if she was pushed or lost balance while standing near the wall. All physical evidence demonstrated that the container was not only the last place Hannah appeared, but the very location where the fatal impact occurred. When sequencing witness statements, investigators noted three key elements that aligned tightly. First, intermediate witness testimony confirming Hannah entered the container and was not seen exiting. Second, Daniel's supplemental testimony describing Reeves' direct physical contact with Hannah inside the container space, including the moment she was pulled or pushed, resulting in a heavy fall. Third, the timing of Daniel's observation perfectly matched the gap in the 1970 timeline from 5:15 to 5:25, the only period during which the fatal injury could have occurred. Simulation analyses showed that no random accident or natural slip could produce the severe radiating skull fracture observed, especially in the confined container space with limited area and no other surfaces capable of causing comparable trauma if Hannah had merely slipped. This reinforced the conclusion that the impact force must have come from the action of another person present in the container space. The only individual present at that exact time, according to testimony, was Reeves. Upon reviewing Reeves' original 1970 statement, investigators found clear contradictions in light of the new evidence. He had claimed Hannah left the farm early, but could not describe her direction. He claimed he only saw her briefly, yet Daniel's testimony confirmed Reeves was right beside the container and engaged in coercive action. He stated he did not know what happened inside the container, but metal evidence showed a fatal level heavy impact occurred on the wall surface. Investigators concluded that Reeves's 1970 statement was not only inaccurate, but deliberately concealed the truth about what happened inside the container. The discovery of Hannah's remains in the landslide area behind Reeves' farm indicated the body had been moved and buried shortly after death. Geological features around the recovery site showed the burial pit bore marks of being dug with metal tools, not formed naturally. When combined with the fact that Reeves was the only person with access to digging tools on the farm and control of the area after Daniel left, investigators determined that the person who buried the body to conceal the death was clearly Reeves. The final timeline was reconstructed in logical sequence. Hannah entered the container around 5:15 p.m. Reeves followed her in shortly after. An altercation or coercive act occurred, leading to a heavy impact that caused Hannah's death. Reeves prevented Daniel from approaching the scene and lied that Hannah was getting items. Immediately after Daniel left the farm out of fear, Reeves processed the scene, moved the body to the rear of the farm, and buried it in a self-dug pit. Afterward, he resumed normal activities and did not report Hannah missing. With all pieces correctly positioned, the investigation team reached the final conclusion that Glenn Reeves was the direct cause of the blunt force trauma that resulted in Hannah Whitford's death and had engaged in body burial to conceal the death. The charging document was completed with three major groups of evidence: forensic, testimonial, and circumstantial. The investigation conclusion was forwarded to the Rhode Island State Prosecutor's Office for further legal proceedings. With Reeves in custody and new evidence collected, the case file advanced to the pre-trial preparation stage, in which all forensic data, testimony, and circumstantial evidence would be presented in court to establish Glenn Reeves' final criminal responsibility. The trial of Glenn Reeves took place at Providence County Court in December 2004, marking the first time the entire chain of evidence in the Hannah Whitford disappearance case was presented publicly before the law. After more than 34 years, the courtroom was packed, including Hannah's relatives, local press, investigative specialists, and Burrillville residents who had lived through the period when the case haunted the community. The Rhode Island State Prosecution began by presenting the investigation's timeline in chronological order, emphasizing that the 1970 case had been closed due to a lack of forensic technology and procedural errors, but advances in forensics by 2004 had finally illuminated the full nature of the case. During the forensic evidence presentation, the prosecution displayed laser scan images of the metal container where Hannah was last seen. The forensic expert described in detail the dent on the container wall, a deformation approximately 10-12 centimeters in diameter, with the center depressed 2-3 mm deep, that perfectly matched the impact force recorded on Hannah's skull. Using a 3D collision reconstruction model, the expert demonstrated that the dent could not have resulted from farm equipment impact or normal use, but could only have occurred when the victim's head struck the flat metal surface with significant force. The prosecution continued by presenting microfiber clothing analysis from the metal seams inside the container, explaining that the polyester-cotton blend, with matching weave pattern and aging characteristics, corresponded to the decayed fabric found with Hannah's remains. The microfibers had silver paint particles adhered to the surface, and the paint sample was identified as matching the original 1970 container coating, indicating the impact occurred before the container was repainted or reused. These pieces of evidence were described as physically indisputable puzzle pieces, for the first time directly linking the container space to the mechanism of the victim's death. When the forensic anthropologist presented the analysis of Hannah's skull, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. He described a star-shaped fracture radiating from the forehead toward the temple, analyzing it as a classic blunt force fracture pattern resulting solely from a single powerful impact. The simulation model showed that the applied force had to exceed 1,000 newtons, far beyond what could occur if the victim had simply slipped or fallen from a standing position inside the container. This completely ruled out the possibility of a natural accident. The prosecution asserted that only Reeves, whose presence was confirmed in the container area at the exact time of Hannah's injury, could have caused this impact. Next, the prosecution called Daniel Crowe to testify. Though now over 50 years old, Daniel still appeared visibly tense as he took the stand. He was asked to recount the full events of the afternoon of August 2, 1970, according to his 2004 supplemental statement. Daniel described the argument between himself and Reeves that occurred right as Hannah entered the container area. Reeves' hostile attitude the moment he saw Reeves move toward Hannah, and especially the moment he witnessed Hannah's figure stagger and fall heavily inside the container. After what appeared to be a pulling or pushing action, Daniel admitted to leaving the scene out of fear that Reeves would attack him and that he would be blamed for the incident. When asked whether he ever saw Hannah leave the container, Daniel answered, "No," affirming that Reeves was the only person who appeared afterward. Daniel's testimony not only filled a critical gap in the timeline, but also confirmed Reeves' presence and actions at the moment of death. The prosecution then presented physical evidence from both 1970 and 2004, including samples of decayed fabric, items seized during the search of Reeves' residence, old digging tools, and 1970s farm records. Although some items lacked direct forensic value, they all reinforced the context. Reeves had full control over the burial area, possessed tools for digging, and had the means to transport the body after the victim's death. Immediately after the charging document was completed with full forensic testimonial and scene analysis evidence, the Rhode Island state prosecutor officially approved an arrest warrant for Glenn Reeves on 3 charges: second-degree manslaughter, concealment of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. The cold case team, together with Burrillville patrol officers, began preparing the execution plan, carefully reviewing Reeves' residence, the house located on land adjacent to Reeves' farm, where he had lived continuously for more than 3 decades since the disappearance. Reeves was now 54 years old, with no criminal history after 1970, but due to the nature of the case involving body concealment and potential evidence destruction, the arrest team was required to plan a cautious approach. A simultaneous search warrant was issued to seize potential evidence retained during Reeves' ongoing use of the farm property, including digging tools, metal items, possibly related to body movement, and old documents that might contain information from the time of Hannah's disappearance. Early in the morning on the day of warrant execution, officers were assembled from the Burrillville Sheriff's Office and state investigative units, divided into 2 teams, one approaching the front door of Reeves' house, the other waiting at the rear to ensure Reeves could not flee if he attempted to escape. At 6:42 a.m., the commanding officer gave the signal, officers knocked, and announced their identity as law enforcement. According to the team's description, Reeves opened the door in a state of confusion, but did not resist when the arrest warrant was clearly read in accordance with regulations. He was instructed to step outside, turn around to be handcuffed, and was placed in a patrol vehicle already positioned in the yard. The rear team confirmed no other individuals were present who could intervene. Immediately after Reeves was escorted from the residence, the search team began a thorough sweep of the house and outbuildings. Their objective was to locate time-resistant evidence, including old digging tools, personal notes from the 1970s, items once stored with the container, or any traces indicating Reeves had intentionally concealed the body in the rear farm area. In the garage, the search team found several old shovels, picks, and digging implements. These items were separated, sealed according to 2004 standards, because, although direct connection to the 1970 burial pit could not be established, they matched the type of tools capable of producing the soil disturbance pattern recorded at the bone recovery scene. In a wooden cabinet in the office, investigators discovered a metal box containing various old personal items belonging to Reeves, including documents from the 1960s and 1970s, work logbooks, seasonal worker lists, and several pages recording farm schedules from the summer of 1970. These documents were seized to determine whether any details related to the time of the disappearance existed. In the rear storage shed area, which Reeves used to store miscellaneous items, the search team found several coils of rope and old canvas bags with yellowed stains. Although it could not be confirmed they were used in body transport, their presence in the area near the container led investigators to seize them for further analysis. The area around the container was also checked one final time to determine whether Reeves had moved items to erase traces before the container was re-examined in 2004. No significant new evidence was found there, but scene photographs showed Reeves had repositioned several objects in the early 1970s, a detail recorded in the file to support the likelihood that Reeves had processed the scene after Hannah's death. All seized evidence was packaged and transferred to the laboratory for continued analysis. Meanwhile, Reeves was transported to Burrillville Police Headquarters for initial processing before transfer to the State Correctional Facility. The arrest was executed without resistance, and the search steps allowed the cold case team to further strengthen supporting points for the charges, particularly the digging implements and old documents, which held significance in clarifying the body concealment conduct after Hannah's death. With Reeves in custody and new evidence collected, the case file advanced to the pre-trial preparation stage, in which all forensic data, testimony, and circumstantial evidence would be presented in court to establish Glenn Reeves' final criminal responsibility. The trial of Glenn Reeves took place at Providence County Court in December 2004, marking the first time the entire chain of evidence in the Hannah Whitford disappearance case was presented publicly before the law. After more than 34 years, the courtroom was packed, including Hannah's relatives, local press, investigative specialists, and Burrillville residents who had lived through the period when the case haunted the community. The Rhode Island State Prosecution began by presenting the investigation's timeline in chronological order, emphasizing that the 1970 case had been closed due to a lack of forensic technology and procedural errors. But advances in forensics by 2004 had finally illuminated the full nature of the case. During the forensic evidence presentation, the prosecution displayed laser scan images of the metal container where Hannah was last seen. The forensic expert described in detail the dent on the container wall, a deformation approximately 10-12 centimeters in diameter, with the center depressed 2-3 mm deep, that perfectly matched the impact force recorded on Hannah's skull. Using a 3D collision reconstruction model, the expert demonstrated that the dent could not have resulted from farm equipment impact or normal use, but could only have occurred when the victim's head struck the flat metal surface with significant force. The prosecution continued by presenting microfiber clothing analysis from the metal seams inside the container, explaining that the polyester cotton blend, with matching weave pattern and aging characteristics, corresponded to the decayed fabric found with Hannah's remains. The microfibers had silver paint particles adhered to the surface, and the paint sample was identified as matching the original 1970 container coating, indicating the impact occurred before the container was repainted or reused. These pieces of evidence were described as physically indisputable puzzle pieces, for the first time directly linking the container space to the mechanism of the victim's death. When the forensic anthropologist presented the analysis of Hannah's skull, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. He described a star-shaped fracture radiating from the forehead toward the temple, analyzing it as a classic blunt force fracture pattern resulting solely from a single powerful impact. The simulation model showed that the applied force had to exceed 1,000 newtons, far beyond what could occur if the victim had simply slipped or fallen from a standing position inside the container. This completely ruled out the possibility of a natural accident. The prosecution asserted that only Reeves, whose presence was confirmed in the container area at the exact time of Hannah's injury, could have caused this impact. Next, the prosecution called Daniel Crowe to testify. Though now over 50 years old, Daniel still appeared visibly tense as he took the stand. He was asked to recount the full events of the afternoon of August 2, 1970. According to his 2004 supplemental statement, Daniel described the argument between himself and Reeves that occurred right as Hannah entered the container area. Reeves' hostile attitude, the moment he saw Reeves move toward Hannah, and especially the moment he witnessed Hannah's figure stagger and fall heavily inside the container, after what appeared to be a pulling or pushing action. Daniel admitted to leaving the scene out of fear that Reeves would attack him and that he would be blamed for the incident. When asked whether he ever saw Hannah leave the container, Daniel answered no, affirming that Reeves was the only person who appeared afterward. Daniel's testimony not only filled a critical gap in the timeline, but also confirmed Reeves' presence and actions at the moment of death. The prosecution then presented physical evidence from both 1970 and 2004, including samples of decayed fabric, items seized during the search of Reeves' residence, old digging tools, and 1970s farm records. Although some items lacked direct forensic value, they all reinforced the context. Reeves had full control over the burial area, possessed tools for digging, and had the means to transport the body after the victim's death. The prosecution also introduced the Geological Survey team's conclusion that the burial pit where the remains were found showed signs of having been dug with metal tools, with the burial timing consistent with 1970. One of the most crucial parts of the trial was the prosecution's argument regarding motive and concealment behavior. The prosecution did not allege premeditated murder, but asserted that this was a death-causing act arising from a conflict or coercion situation, after which Reeves deliberately concealed the body, as evidenced by the immediate burial on farm property and the subsequent rearrangement of the container. The charge of second-degree manslaughter was deemed appropriate given the mechanism of death and Reeves' subsequent conduct. When the defense's turn came, they argued that the forensic evidence did not completely rule out the possibility of an accident, and that the long passage of time made many details difficult to verify. However, the defense could not reasonably explain why the container dent perfectly matched the skull injury, why Hannah's clothing microfibers appeared in the metal seams, or why Reeves was the only person present who failed to report the incident. Their claim that Reeves could not clearly remember the events was rebutted by the prosecution pointing out that he had falsely stated Hannah left the farm early when no witness ever confirmed this. The defense also failed to account for the presence of the body buried directly behind the farm within Reeves' area of control. After 11 days of trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Glenn Reeves guilty of the charges second-degree manslaughter, concealment of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. When the judge read the sentence, he emphasized that Reeves' concealment of the truth for 3 decades had caused severe harm to the victim's family and to the justice system. The sentence imposed was 55 years imprisonment without parole, reflecting the gravity of the conduct that caused Hannah Whitford's death and the deliberate prolonged effort to conceal the truth for over 34 years. The Hannah Whitford investigation file was officially closed in early 2005, after the 55-year no-parole sentence for Glenn Reeves was pronounced, and all forensic data, testimony, and circumstantial evidence had been adjudicated through the legal process. In the summary report submitted to the Rhode Island State Prosecutor's Office and the Burrillville Police Department, the cold case team stated that this case serves as a classic example of the difference between investigative capabilities in 1970 and professional standards in 2004, while identifying 5 serious errors that caused the file to remain stalled for over 3 decades. The first error was prematurely eliminating Glenn Reeves from suspicion based solely on his outwardly cooperative demeanor without conducting field corroboration of statements or behavioral analysis as required by modern investigative basics. The second error was the failure to properly examine the container. The 1970 investigation team only performed a visual inspection, overlooking key traces including the metal dent, clothing microfibers, and paint particles, elements that the technology of the time could not detect, but standard procedures should have required better scene documentation and preservation. The third error was the emotionally driven focus on Daniel Crowe without objective evidence, which misdirected all resources and failed to properly target the central figure. The fourth error was the failure to reconstruct the timeline using time measurement and relative position reconstruction techniques. This lost the opportunity to recognize that Reeves' statements were incompatible with objective facts. The fifth error was closing the case too early in 1972 without follow-up checks or evidence cross-referencing, leaving the file inactive for 32 years and overlooking the possibility that the container, the last place the victim was seen, might contain critical traces. In addition to identifying the errors, the summary also recorded 5 key factors that enabled the case to be solved in 2004. First, the discovery of remains after a storm, which reopened the entire case with a fresh scene. Second, the ability to perform DNA testing from bone marrow and match it to the 1970 hair sample, confirming the victim's identity. Third, modern forensic techniques, laser, ALS, UV, that enabled detection of clothing microfibers, paint particles, and a matching metal dent, thereby establishing the container as the death scene. Fourth, Daniel Crowe's supplemental testimony, which filled timeline gaps and confirmed Reeves' presence at the moment of injury. Finally, motion simulation models and scene reconstruction that scientifically determined the mechanism of death, completely eliminating accident and proving Reeves' intervening conduct. From the lessons learned during the case review, the summary proposed 6 necessary improvements for handling long-term missing persons cases. 1. No person of interest or witness may be eliminated from suspicion before field corroboration of statements. 2. Every scene, even without obvious signs of crime, must be preserved and documented in detail, especially in closed spaces such as containers, vehicles, and sheds. 3. Establish mandatory technical timeline reconstruction procedures, including determining actual positions, lines of sight, and timing from witness statements. 4. Collect and preserve biological evidence, even when current technology is insufficient for analysis, to enable future techniques. 5. Train investigators to minimize the impact of emotional judgment on investigative direction. 6. Implement an automatic periodic review mechanism for long-term missing persons files to take advantage of new forensic advances. At the end of the summary, the cold case team declared the Hannah Whitford file officially closed, with a complete conclusion regarding cause of death, perpetrator, and body concealment mechanism. The historical errors were documented not only to explain the more than 30-year delay, but also to ensure future investigative units avoid repeating similar shortcomings. The case is regarded as a textbook example of how modern forensic technology can recover truth buried for decades and deliver final answers to a file that once seemed permanently silenced. The story of the Hannah Whitford case, a teenage girl who went missing in 1970, but whose case was only solved in 2004, clearly reflects the issues that American society still faces today in investigation, community management, and protection of vulnerable victims. What prolonged the case for over 3 decades was not only the technological limitations of the time, but also very human biases in how people assess situations, blind trust in Glenn Reeves' outwardly cooperative appearance, the preconception that a boyfriend is always the prime suspect, and the underestimation of an apparently harmless scene like a container. These factors all stem from subjective reasoning habits, something even modern society continues to fall into. This case reminds us that in real American life, where small communities still operate on familiarity and personal impressions, maintaining a clear-headed, skeptical attitude is essential, especially when others' safety is involved. One important detail is that the container, despite being the last place Hannah was seen, was undervalued and not examined according to proper procedure. This reflects a practical lesson in modern life. Sometimes the small, inconspicuous details, an unusual neighbor's behavior, a change in a familiar space, a conversation left hanging, can be the key to recognizing danger. Additionally, Daniel's silence for many years out of fear of being misunderstood highlights the importance of encouraging people to report what they witness, even if they are uncertain. American culture today is working to build see something, say something systems, and Hannah's story is clear proof that silence, however rooted in fear, can delay justice for decades. Finally, thanks to modern forensic technology, the truth was brought to light. This reminds us that progress, data, evidence, science, is always the foundation for making correct decisions, rising above emotion and prejudice. In contemporary American life, where misinformation spreads widely, respect for truth and scientific methods is what protects us from regrettable mistakes like the Hannah Whitford case. Thank you for following this heartbreaking yet profoundly meaningful story to the end. Please subscribe to the channel to continue joining us on journeys to uncover truths buried by time. See you in the next video, where we will continue revealing the remaining mysteries of America.